So welcome everyone to this special Black All Year podcast. If you've missed any of our previous podcasts, they are all available. If you're watching or listening to this, then please like and subscribe, as not only does it make sure that you don't miss any future material, it also helps others to find the content. I just wanted to quickly talk a little bit about Black All Year and why we have Black All Year. It's kind of because every October I'm invited to talk to a whole range of audiences about equality, diversity and inclusion, and about being a Black female leader. And whilst I'm always happy to do this, I started to get really frustrated that nobody wanted to talk about race other than in Black History Month in the UK. And it just kind of went all quiet the rest of the year round. So I decided that somebody needed to do something about that, and we should be talking about these subjects all year round, because after all, we are Black all year. And being the kind of person that does, I thought, well, if nobody else is going to do it, I will. So I set up Black All Year. And I hope that through the events, podcasts and videos that will highlight the issues, the challenges, as well as the achievements and experiences of Black people who are the minoritised global majority. So we've got a really great show for you today. It is a special. It's only available on podcasts, so you will not find this anywhere else. And I have three great guests. First of all, we've got Amneet Graham. So Amneet is the project manager for the Communities of Cultures project, which is run by Sheffield Maternity Cooperative. I first met Amneet when she was chair of the Maternity Voices Partnership in Newcastle. She is also the founder of Willow's Rainbow Box and author of Understanding South Asian Baby Loss. And she's a massive advocate for addressing inequalities in maternity. We also have Patrice Dantzie, who is a facilitator for the Community of Cultures project's cultural competency training. She's also a trainee counsellor and will be specialising in perinatal mental health once she's fully qualified. And she's also a bereavement support services officer for SANS, which is a baby loss charity. And bereavement support is something very close to my heart because in my day job, I run a hospice. So I know just how invaluable that support is. And finally, we have Afshan Ali. She is a midwife in the northeast of England, and prior to that, she worked in law for about 8 years. She's passionate about addressing maternal health inequalities, and she is also a facilitator for the Community of Cultures project Cultural Competency Training. So welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we've got a really important topic to discuss here, and I know a lot of people will not be aware of this at all, and that's the differences in maternity outcomes and experience for Black and minoritised women compared to white women, and we're talking about here in the UK in 2022. So could you tell us a little bit about those differences in outcome and experiences?
I think I'll go first. So I think a really good place to start would be the Embrace report. So for those who haven't heard of that, what it actually stands for is Mothers and Babies Reducing Risk Through Audits and Confidential Inquiries Across the UK. And basically it's sort of like a national audit programme, and it's commissioned by all of the UK governments to collect information about all late fetal losses, stillbirths, neonatal deaths and maternal deaths across the UK. So what the programme does is it tracks the information about where and why babies and mothers die every year in the UK, and they undertake sort of an analysis and investigation into the causes of these deaths. So from this information, what happens every year is key messages are identified, and then recommendations are developed to be implemented and actioned to improve the care. So there may be sort of like a leading cause of deaths. So the recent report says that it's SUDEP, so it's sudden unexplained death for people with epilepsy. So what will happen is sort of they'll look at kind of what they could have done to improve things in terms of screening, multidisciplinary working, etc. And something will be put into force to try and improve them outcomes. So honing it down, the latest Embrace report, so for outcomes between 2017 and 2019 was published in November 2021. So as you can appreciate, it takes time for all this data to be analysed. So the latest report is for figures from 2017 to 2019. And this unfortunately shows, yet again, the stark disparity in maternal mortality rates between women from Black and Asian ethnic groups compared to white women. So as it stands, if you're Black and pregnant in the UK, you're more than 4 times higher to die, 4 times more likely to die. And for South Asian women, it's twice as likely. So looking at that, apart from a very slight drop in the maternal mortality rate for Black women, this picture hasn't changed for over a decade. And I think that with sort of, and what's brought it to the surface in the sense that it's been talked about a little bit more sort of nationally was the Black Lives Matter movement and the COVID deaths that we saw. There was a high disparity between ethnic minorities and people who were white who contracted COVID. So, this is not new news in maternity. This has always been the case. But like the how you introduced us at the beginning of the podcast, not many people know, and they're quite shocked. When we mention this from the world of maternity. When you do look at the report, within the foreword in the full report, obviously it's quite lengthy. There is a sort of a shorter version, and then there's one like an infographic version. Birthright UK, which Patrice will talk about in a little while, they have highlighted their concern that Black and brown people's basic human rights to safety, dignity, respect and equality in pregnancy and childbirth are not being protected, respected or upheld. So I think that's a really good starting point, because that's our statistical, backup for looking at the overall bleak picture in the UK.
Thank you. And I think it's really it is really stark. I mean, fortunately in the UK, maternal death is not that common.
No.
But the fact that you've got a multiple of 2 if you are from a Southeast Asian background, or 4 if you are Black African, Black Caribbean heritage, is really, it's really stark. You can't hide that, can you? It's not as if it's, it's you're 25, what's it? 25% more likely. It's not that. It is 2 or 4 times more likely.
Yeah.
And this is something that really shouldn't be happening.
No.
Do people know why? Do we know what the root of that is? Because I'm sure there's lots of theories out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall you're quite right. First, the point you made that, fortunately in this country, pregnancy, childbirth is very, very safe. We're talking about really small numbers, but when we break them numbers down, that is what we're kind of looking at. And I think looking at sort of why sort of the deaths in COVID were higher for our ethnic minorities, and looking at the Black Lives Movement and everything that comes with it, the reasons are probably the same, and it's kind of being looked into. And, I think you can say that it's not that the comorbidities are higher in this population or anything like that. It's, is it are we looking at just unequal care, and access to care is not the same. So this has definitely been looked into, and the reports that Patrice and Amneet are going to talk about will probably explore that a little bit more in terms of why is this happening, because we need these are the questions we need to ask. And I just think the more, it's not about making people feel uncomfortable when you're having these conversations, but the conversation should be a challenging one. And if it's not challenging, and if it doesn't raise a level of discomfort, then for me, I don't think it's a very constructive conversation. So, we need to kind of get over that barrier as well, that actually, to talk about racism and talk about sort of inequality in healthcare, you need the right people to be acknowledging the problems that are there. So yeah, I think that's absolutely vital.
And I think you make a really good point there about discomfort. It's I quite often now when I talk, I say, this conversation will make you feel uncomfortable. And all I ask is that you hang on to that discomfort and you try to understand why you feel so uncomfortable. And it's probably because you're hearing something that is not right and you shouldn't feel comfortable about. It's not about saying you are a bad person. It's saying this situation is wrong.
Is wrong.
And I think one of the things I want to say just before we go any further is that so from the point of view of health outcomes, I used to hear a lot of stuff. So I was told many years ago, I used to work in a cardiac department in a hospital. And I was actually told that Black people's blood vessels were thinner than white people's blood vessels. And that's why we were more likely to get heart disease. There is nothing genetically at all with Black and brown people that means we are predisposed to anything. And I know that the BBC did a really good documentary about COVID and why so many Black people were dying from COVID. And the scene was a discussion between the presenter and a doctor who actually said that genetically I'm as likely to have something, my genes are more likely to be closely similar to somebody who is white than they are to another person who's of mixed heritage, which is my ethnic background. So this whole thing about there's a genetic thing going on there, let's just put that to bed. There's not. It's not genetics. And then we can carry on with the conversation from there before anybody thinks that's
absolutely. I mean, when I was a student, just the last point I'll make, I was told, in a moving and handling session that we had, that South Asian women can't tolerate pain. And Black women are very strong. Now, that was openly said to me as a student, which then, will start to form a sort of bias naturally if this is what is being discussed, by those people that are, very kind of advanced in their experience of maternity care and have worked in it for a long time. It's a damning statement, and are we then, is this a consequence of statements like that are being made? That's really interesting.
And just to put that in context, when were you training? It wasn't that long ago.
No, it wasn't. No, within the last 5 years. Yeah.
So great. So we've got this situation where people who are Black and brown are a lot more likely to die during is it during childbirth itself or during pregnancy and childbirth?
Pregnancy, it's pregnancy complications and childbirth.
And what else do we know from the information that we're showing? So that data that you shared about the twice more likely if you're Southeast Asian, 4 times more likely if you are Black, African, Caribbean heritage. What really is happening as a result of that having been, as you say, unchanged for so many years now?
Yeah, I mean, it started such a long time ago, but now I think things are gaining more momentum. And one of the reports I'm going to talk about is the Birthright Inquiry. So Birthright's a human rights charity, Human Rights in Birth. And they did an inquiry called Systemic Racism, Not Broken Bodies. And that was a year-long inquiry where they spoke to various people, various women from Black communities and Asian communities and ethnic communities to find out what their experiences were of their maternity care and where they might have experienced elements of racism as well. Because as you said, that data, part of it it's got to be caused by unconscious bias and racism. And I think it causes a lot of discomfort, as you said, for people to actually accept that. And I've heard so many people go, well, it can't be that, but it's got to be that, or it's got to be genetics. But let's look at the bigger picture here. And one of the quotes, actually, before I get into the report, the very beginning says, one of the things that's really embedded in this system is the blame that's put on Black bodies, and that this is somehow our fault because our bodies don't work in the correct way. So as we've just discussed, that's just not correct, but that's the responsibility has been put back on people. But the birth rights report brought out quite a lot of different themes, and one of the ones I'm going to mention is about safety. So people didn't feel safe in their maternity care. And the quote that I've picked is, "Feeling unsafe during maternity care was the most prominent theme in the testimonies that we received, with 2/3 of people who shared their stories describing not feeling safe some or all of the time. Participants in our inquiry told us that racism and racial discrimination had a direct impact on their sense of safety." Yeah.
And feeling safe it's one of the fundamental things, and we have discussed this on Black All Year before, around that there's that psychological feeling of safety, and if you don't have that, you then, will you speak out? Will you challenge? Will you question if you do not feel safe to do it? If you think there's going to be some kind of repercussion, or if you feel that people are going to dismiss you because, well, for whatever reason, if you think they're going to dismiss your views and you don't feel safe to raise your views, then do you even say it in the first place? And is that what that's kind of getting at? Is it that element?
Yeah, and also the physical safety of where we talked about a little bit about pain, but it's people these assumptions made about Black people not feeling pain, and so that's been carried right through to their care, where they've missed things because they haven't been listened to, and they've had this assumption thrown upon them, and then that really is detrimental to their physical safety. One of the actual quotes from the report was, so this is a person who they'd later learned that they had suspected septicemia, and it was captured just in time with the antibiotics drip. "I believe that the doctor saved my life and my baby's life. And if I think if I was a white woman, my constant request to check my pain relief would have been validated. I, like the nurse, thought I was either strong enough or I was exaggerating." So this person obviously was declined pain relief when they had said it, and it was all to do with the assumption and the unconscious bias around the pain. So yeah, there's the physical safety, but also people not feeling they can complain because they feel that that would put their safety at risk as well.
And I suppose that goes back to that, what you were told, Afshan, during training, isn't it? If Southeast Asian women have a very low pain threshold, then they're going to complain all the time and they're not really in pain and we don't need to give them pain relief. And if Black women can tolerate a lot of pain, then they don't need pain relief.
Yeah, and I've heard, a lot, and I've heard, I still hear this, that, South Asian women are like princesses, and they get everything done for them, and etc. And I just out of sort of just to try and improve people's understandings, in my own time, at request of the uni that I attended, I speak to the students about different cultures. So in the sense that I educate them that, sort of in different cultures, these are kind of the rituals that may happen. For example, so I'm a Muslim, so in Islam, there's the call to prayer, the removal of the baby's hair, the male circumcision and things like that. The same with the Jewish culture, etc. And we have some really interesting conversations. And I do, it is an uncomfortable session, but people learn a lot from it. And just even me kind of saying, just because something is not practiced in the West doesn't mean it's wrong. So, if women from the South Asian culture are looked after for 40 days and have their housework done and their meals made, why is that wrong? And the term unconscious bias, I personally do have, do sometimes take issue with it, because I just feel it's a term that can be used just to make the opposing party feel better about their thoughts and their biases, and really, and it can be interchanged with racism, and it's just a way of making people feel more comfortable. Absolutely, unconscious bias occurs, and I'm guilty of it, we all are, but it's very different to sort of racism, discrimination, based on grounds of religious or religion or colour or sexual orientation, etc. But
I couldn't agree. Sorry.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more with you
Yeah.
on unconscious bias. It is a thing, it exists. But actually, if you're just going to go, oh, well, I know I now am conscious of my bias because somebody's highlighted it to me, but it's a bias I've got, so what? You're then just being consciously biased. So, the whole point of knowing that you have unconscious biases is so you can find out what they are so that you can then act against them.
Yeah.
But that's not what people do. They go, oh, well, it's an unconscious bias. No, you know about it. It's not unconscious anymore.
It's not unconscious, no.
So I think it's great that you're doing that work. But I love that point that you made there about just because it's not the way it's done by white people in the West doesn't mean it's wrong. And interestingly, in Newcastle, where I'm based, when you look at breastfeeding uptake across the city, it's really high in the areas you would expect. So the nice middle class areas, they've got a good uptake of breastfeeding. But interestingly, it's as high, if not higher, in some of our most deprived areas. But they are the areas which are far more culturally diverse and have a lot of people from Asia and from Africa. Because actually, in Ghana, where my dad's from, people will be breastfed until the age of 3 or 4 because it's safer than using formula and stuff like that, and it's cheaper as well. So breastfeeding is just a cultural thing that is acceptable and done. Now, does that mean that because it's done in Africa, it's bad? No, and actually the areas where it's worst is the areas which are very high white working class areas. Because it's seen as being dirty, rude, all of that type of thing. So I love that. I might have to have a t-shirt made. Just because it's not done in the West doesn't mean it's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. It's important to highlight other cultures and how other cultures do things, and there is this lack of knowledge and understanding from some services about other cultures, and again, some of it might make people feel uncomfortable, but it's we all do things differently, we all have different traditions and different values, and in order to sort of really support the person that you're meant to be supporting, I think you need to understand them better. You need to understand what their traditions and values are.
I think that goes back to the question you asked as well, or that's part of the answer of the why. Why are there these inequalities? And I was going to share a bit from the 5 Times More report that also recently came out. And for those who don't know about 5 Times More, they are kind of their aims are to highlight and change maternal outcomes for Black women and birthing people, and to support Black women and birthing people with their resources, and to help to train health professionals and lobby for change as well. And I think one of the really interesting things about their report was it didn't just capture statistics, but it also captured the views and experiences of over 1,000 Black and Black mixed women and birthing people. And one of the things that came out from that is that Black and Black mixed women face racism, racial assumptions, stereotyping, microaggressions, regardless of income, occupation, marital status, and age. And I think oftentimes, we hear in the news, like, was mentioned before, Black people may be more predisposed to certain health conditions or comorbidities, or, like with COVID, it was because, Black people may live in poorer areas, but actually there are real issues that are at play regardless of income, or regardless of your age, or regardless of all those different things. And I think, that report highlighted a lot. There's so many quotes of poor experiences that women faced. One of them that I can share from someone, they shared, there was a sense that the midwives felt I could handle the pain. I was left alone to give birth to my baby in the toilet. She fell into the loo on my last push. The midwives didn't check on me for hours. So again, that kind of goes back to, you know, the fact that Black women can kind of bear more pain. But also I think that looking at the positive side of so the report, you know, shared a lot of negative experiences, but obviously there are some positive experiences, many positive experiences, and what those positive experiences were founded upon were maternity teams that were more culturally diverse, more understanding, showed empathy and compassion, and communicated to the women how their wishes were being considered. And I guess from that, again, I'll pull out having cultural understanding, I think, is really important as well.
And is that how both yourself, Patrice, and Asha do cultural competency training, and is that linked to exactly that better cultural understanding of different cultures and how different people do things?
Yeah, I think so. You know, I think the training, and I am one of the newer facilitators, so I don't know if Asha or Amneet want to speak a bit more on this, but I think it is one of those things, like you said earlier, this might be a bit uncomfortable, but I think it really gets people to start thinking, and the training is over 2 days, and hopefully I think the thought processes of everyone that takes part, it might take longer than 2 days to kind of process everything, but I think it really starts to plant those seeds of considering how it is to live in England and access, you know, these health services when you're probably at one of your most vulnerable times, when you're not white, when you are Black, when you are brown, and some assumptions, again, we spoke about unconscious biases and also conscious biases that, you know, people may have that can affect maternity care.
I think the actual training that we do is, it's more about sort of reflecting on those biases and your own attitudes and values and exploring more of those sort of themes. But the Community of Cultures project, we do a lot around cultural awareness. So for example, I'm going to be speaking to someone soon about Sikhism and birth and pregnancy, and we've had blog posts from other people with like a Muslim woman who had postnatal depression, and so we're highlighting all of those different experiences which will be useful. But yeah, the training itself, I guess, is partly, it's for people to sit with their discomfort, and a lot of people go into it thinking, oh no, I don't have unconscious bias, or, you know, I'm great at this, like, but then they come out and they really think, oh, I didn't realize that. So it's kind of like a self-learning journey that people go on.
Yeah, I think for many people it's that, you know, we all like to think we're a good person and that we're a nice person, and actually knowing that you have a bias, or actually that you are prejudiced or discriminate against people, it's really difficult to sit with them, a good, nice, kind person. And I know that I've done a lot of work on my biases, so that they're still there, because actually they're kind of, some of them are hardwired from when I was very young, but about being aware of it and therefore not taking negative action on it and putting in place things that will positively counteract those prejudice and biases. And I think it's okay. It's not okay to have them, but we all do. Yeah. And the fact that we all do, we're not all horrible.
No.
Yeah.
it's what you do with them, I think, that's really key there. And I think it was interesting because we were just talking before about practices from other cultures not all being bad. Now, there are some that we would discourage and that we do think are actually not acceptable at all. But again, I suppose there's something about how we challenge that, because if not so much us, but if you have a white doctor, a white midwife, or whatever, who's just standing there and lecturing and saying, this is wrong, this is evil, and doesn't understand that cultural context that comes from, you're not really going to change anybody's minds in that, are you?
No.
I think there needs to be empathy and understanding. We are all different, and as you said, we all have our biases, and I think that it's important to recognize that we do have biases. They could be big, they could be small, but I think in this context it's so important to be aware of what your biases may be, and be aware that it's so important to show empathy and to be willing to learn and to be willing to teach. So just in the same way, you may not fully understand someone's culture. I think there are resources within the NHS where, you can access that information to find out about different cultures, different religious practices, festivals, things like that. But also I think it's important to show empathy when you're sharing, for instance, if someone is doing something that's wrong, not to come down harshly on them. And again, I think that's where that empathy comes in, because if you understand why they're doing it, that helps then to show empathy when you're explaining, okay, maybe that's not the correct way to do this. This is how you do it instead. And that's then going to be received so much better, because then the person receives that empathy. They know that you care and that you're actually trying to help them and you're not just judging them. I think when someone feels judged, they shut down.
Yeah.
Very much so. So we've got this awful situation where we have throughout pregnancy and childbirth, we've got higher mortality, and I believe actually even when that doesn't result in death, there's actually terrible experiences. So I can remember listening to a radio program where I was driving at the time and hearing women recount some of the experiences that they'd had and being in tears because they were just so horrendous. Now, they hadn't resulted in death, obviously. Their children ended up being well, but their experience of childbirth, particularly in a hospital environment, was terrible. And if they then went on to have further children, actually quite traumatic to then be going back into that situation. So just interesting if you've got any kind of views or if anything came through in the reports about that as well.
I just wanted to sort of add in my own experience here, which I'm perfectly happy to do. I had a baby in November 2020 in the middle of COVID, and basically I had a lot of mental health to do with it as well. I was very anxious. And one of the things I was anxious about was going to the hospital and being turned away, told it was like not far enough along. That didn't happen, luckily. The other one was not being given pain relief that would ease my pain. Unfortunately, that one did happen because I went to the hospital. I was examined when I got there. I was between 3 and 4 centimeters, the second baby though, and I knew things were progressing. Like I just knew, and I think people do just know, because they know their bodies. I was in so much pain. I was like on the toilet floor on all fours, screaming, telling my husband I'm gonna die, and telling the midwife I needed some pain relief. And she was like, no. She said the gas and air canister was behind her, but because of policy, she said I couldn't have it because I wasn't far enough along. I was honestly in so much pain. That was a really awful experience. And then we're not planning to have any more children, but if we do, that will definitely impact on what I decide to do, how I decide to give birth, and how I feel about the whole pregnancy. I think it was annoying because afterwards I did find, people have said maybe there was some sort of racism involved, and I wasn't sure. But when I spoke to some people who, like my white counterparts, people had been given the pain relief. Whether that was just the person I had on the day, I don't know. But yeah, then you hear I heard so many stories after that through these reports and through the data, and I'm like, well, yeah, that happened to me. And I don't know. I don't really know why. But yeah, so that's a personal experience of that.
And I'm first of all, I'm really sorry you had that experience, because that's awful. And it does sound very much like that. There was a lack of belief that you were in the kind of pain that you were in. And But what you really highlighted there when you were talking about, I don't know why it happened, is actually one of the issues with racism, isn't it? Because a lot of people who haven't experienced racism think it's really overt and in your face, and it's, it's going to be dead obvious that that's what it is. But actually, a lot of the time, it's not like that at all. And you are left questioning, well, why did that happen? And if you're anything like me, I used to go through like every single possible other reason that it could be, until I finally got to, is it because I'm black?
Yeah.
And it was once I'd discounted everything else, and you think, you know what, it probably was the second or third reason was because, it was racism. But I would go to extremes to try and excuse somebody's behavior on the grounds of anything but race. And I suppose that may be one of the reasons why this hasn't been discussed as publicly as it should be, because women are sitting there thinking, well, I don't know why this happened to me. And it's only once that data is brought together and it's kind of like, oh, well, hang on, there's a real commonality between these experiences and what people are telling us they were told, and that really shows the value of those reports.
Definitely. And I think what you were saying about the impact of these experiences on people, so as I said, for me it would definitely be, it would impact my next pregnancy and my thoughts and everything, but these sorts of things lead to distrust and disengagement with services, and that's another big thing where people are questioning why, that whole hard to reach thing, which I don't like, the hard to reach thing, because people aren't hard to reach, but I think people need to really think about some of the reasons why people disengage with services.
Yeah, we're not hard to reach. You're just not looking in the right places, and you're not listening. Actually, a lot of the time, I prefer the seldom listened to now. I think that's a really good description. So, what else has come out of the reports that you've been looking at that it would be useful to share?
This maybe hasn't been highlighted in the reports, but it's a point that Patrice made, which was, I think, really relevant. So in terms of, looking at our diversity within the workforce, so, the latest figures for 21-22 in terms of percentages, so this is just for midwives, I've not included nurses in this, so we're looking at 0.2% of the workforce within midwifery is Bangladeshi, 0.1% is Arab, 0.6% is Indian, 0.6% is Pakistani, 1.7% is African Caribbean, and 2.5% is African. And it's looking at them statistics and thinking, if we're looking at educating the workforce and those that work within the NHS, it needs to be done by representation, if anything else. Only I can understand my culture as Amneet can understand hers, as Patrice can understand hers, compared to somebody looking from outside in. So, in terms of when I first started as a midwife, I was the only ethnic minority for the trust, right? In terms of midwifery workforce, as a qualified midwife, there was one other midwife, but had stepped down in terms of her duties. And now I think there's 4 of us, okay, but we cover a huge area and we are a really big trust. So in terms of representation, it's still really, really low. But the reaction, and you guys might have experienced the same, the reaction that I get when I walk into a room and it is somebody who's from an ethnic minority background, doesn't necessarily have to be South Asian, their demeanor changes. And suddenly, and especially so if I can communicate with them, because I can speak other languages, and just having that understanding that cultural understanding, or the understanding that their culture may be different, and to adapt my way of looking after that woman and her family makes such a huge difference on their experience. So, you know, we're looking at such low numbers in terms of overall representation within the midwifery workforce. You know, that in itself has been highlighted. And I know that the local universities, to me, have invited me to days that they have held just for ethnic minority groups from the local colleges, to try and get them to consider sort of, you know, a profession within midwifery or nursing, because I honestly do believe representation is key. It's only one section of the whole, you know, the whole pie, if you like, but you know, we definitely need to sort of educate the community as well, that this can be a, you know, a career for life, and the development that you can kind of, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be a doctor or a dentist, which, you know, in my culture especially has always been the trajectory that, you know, if you're going to go into healthcare, it's either doctor or dentistry. But, you know, midwifery and nursing is just as important and just as fulfilling, and actually should be massively encouraged. So, you know, some work needs to be done, I think, in all areas in relation to promoting that, and in terms of, you know, recruiting students onto these places. Obviously they have to be, you know, sufficiently qualified to be able to go on, but a massive drive in recruitment, I think, will, you know, can only help, can't it, really?
And I would say I completely agree with that. And on the other side of when I had my first daughter, my experience was difficult for so many different reasons. And with my son, I chose to have a home birth, and that started to not go to plan. And when a Black lady, a Black midwife turned up, who wasn't supposed to come, but it's a really long story, but she ended up coming to my house, I remember literally crying with relief, because I just felt so safe, especially, you know, I was already in labor, already in pain, and things weren't going to plan. When she came, and in fact, both midwives that came were Black, they were older, and I just felt so safe before they even said anything. And again, It's just that feeling of they're going to understand, they're going to, you know, get me, support me, whatever it was, I just felt safe. And I think that's, it makes a huge difference.
I think, that thing of representation is really important. And like you said, Afsha, it's not even, doesn't even have to be somebody of this exactly the same ethnicity as you, but there's something about when you see somebody who has any shade of brown skin, you do kind of go, okay, I can say stuff here that I would feel less comfortable saying in front of a white person, because they might judge me or they wouldn't understand what I was talking about. You know, I can have conversations with people from South Asian backgrounds, and I talk about aunties and things like that, and they understand what I mean. Whereas if I talk to somebody who is white British and I say aunties, they think it's my mum or dad's sister. That's an auntie. So very, very different. Just that being able to see somebody who looks like you. I'm not expecting you to have the statistics, but I really do wonder as well, once you start looking at leadership within midwifery, I suspect that is very, very white. And that in itself, even if the numbers don't go up amongst the number of midwives, but actually if we're looking at leadership, the more diverse we can make that, then the more likely it is that we'll start to see change in practice, I think, amongst midwives. I don't know how you feel about that, Asha.
I completely agree with that. And I think that's within the NHS and any massive organisation within the UK, you know, there is a massive disparity in leadership roles. And you know, you look at the res data for all the, you know, the NHS trusts, and it says exactly as you've said there. I mean, our chief midwifery officer is Black, Jacqueline Dunkley-Bent, and you know, that in itself, I always also am a massive advocate for and really push, and we've seen this in maternity, and Amneet and Patrice, you've probably seen this as well, in terms of when we are using sort of kind of any infographics or any kind of posters in relation to health education and things in maternity, they have become more diverse. And I think also you can kind of relate that to encouraging people from minority communities to come into the workforce, because if you see somebody who looks like you or, you know, comes from a similar background, you know, as a midwife or as, you know, sort of the matron or whoever, suddenly that becomes an achievable goal. And it's the same with the health promotion, you know, using images of women who are Black, women with headscarves, you know, has massively opened up that conversation, because suddenly it's relatable. And yes, now that poster or that kind of, you know, whatever infographic it may be, that relates to me now. I am pregnant, that looks like me. And you can suddenly relate to it so much more. So there's something in, you know, in having representation visibly present in all different arenas, because then it does become achievable, it becomes relatable, and you think, well, she got there or he got there, you know, so can I, kind of a thing. And also I can only imagine it would make people feel more at ease. Like you said, you know, I am proud now when I see some of the things that have come out from our local trust and there is a more diverse use of images and things. I just think this is, you know, this should have happened many, many years ago. However, it's now starting to happen, and that can only be a good thing. And it's small changes like this, you know, that will have such a huge impact. But yeah, you know, if you see something that you can relate to, you absolutely can see it as a goal.
Yeah, definitely. So our time is almost up, and I'm going to just give you a little bit of thinking time. So first of all, if there's anything that you haven't had an opportunity to say that you really wanted to get across, then you're going to have a chance in a second. But also, if there was one thing that you'd like people to take away from this conversation and perhaps even put into action, because I'm really keen that we don't just talk about stuff, that we have stuff that people can take forward and make changes. I'm going to come to you in a minute about that. But I just was thinking about something that was said earlier about some of the causes of this, and the fact that it's not just because we have you know, we come from poorer backgrounds, and it is right across the demographic. And I think you're absolutely right, it's right across that socioeconomic demographic that we've got issues. But actually, when people say, oh, well, you're more likely to be poor if you're Black or brown, I would say, why is that? Because if you're saying that's because we are less able, less intelligent, less ambitious, you're racist. And I will call that out, because we're not. There are reasons why you are more likely to live in deprivation if you come from Black and South Asian backgrounds. And that is because of systemic racism. So whichever way you want to look at it, even if you don't believe all of the, you know, you think all midwives are angels and they never have a bit of prejudice or bias, if you're saying it's all because of the starting health circumstances of the women involved, that's because of racism. So again, that thing of stop blaming the women, it's not the women. There are other issues at play. So that thing that I came to you about, if there's anything that you wanted to say, or if there's one thing that you'd like people to take away.
I'll just say, I think we talked a lot about, you know, people maybe being on the defense and maybe not wanting to believe that racism can be a thing in healthcare, or not wanting to think that they might have biases that they need to address. But I think one thing that people can really do to try and tackle these inequalities and try and do something themselves is to go on some do some cultural competency training and work around themselves and in their teams, and that can just sort of give you space to think about some very simple things you can do in your workplace that would make a difference. So like Afshan was saying about the posters becoming more diverse and things like that, I think doing some training and understanding yourself, and then doing some training within a team, like, you know, multidisciplinary, is a really good thing that people can do to get them on the step to becoming culturally safe, I guess.
Great, thank you. Who'd like to go next?
I'll go next. By the time Patrice is unmuted, I'll quickly jump in.
Jump in there.
I think knowledge is power, just off the back of what Amneet said there. And, you know, I'm a midwife and I love my job. And I honestly think it is one of the greatest honours. And to think that, if there's anything that I can learn that will help to improve, the experiences of women and their families going through this process, I absolutely am there at the front of the queue, and I just think, you don't even necessarily need to sort of, access paid training or anything like that. It's just about having that knowledge and having that insight. And if there is somebody within the workforce or within the trust that and you're comfortable having conversations with about, if you've got any questions about certain practices or why certain people do certain things in various ways, just ask. Education is empowerment, and I honestly think that's, we need to put the onus on the healthcare professionals as well as, the NHS as a whole, because this can't continue. This is a very real statistic. And, I've had people ask me, that's not true. Have you got that from the Daily Mail? And I'm just like, no offense to the Daily Mail for anyone who follows them, but, it's just kind of like, no, this is an absolute statistic, and it always has been. And it was 5 times more likely, up until over a year ago. And we just need to do better. We need to do better completely.
Yeah. And just on the back of that, actually, if you are a healthcare professional, or anybody actually, and you're dealing with somebody who comes from a different culture and you don't know, I would also say ask the person, because actually we love to talk about ourselves. We love to talk about our cultures and what it means to us and why we do things. So actually coming at it from that position of, I'm really curious and interested, can you tell me a bit more about that? I think people would welcome that rather than seeing it as something that was intrusive or horrible. So if you don't know, ask, I would say, from that perspective. Patrice.
Yeah, I've unmuted now. I would say for anyone listening where, something that we said resonates with them, in the sense that maybe they have had a negative experience during, their pregnancy or labor or after their baby was born, or they know someone that has. I hope this helps them to feel that they weren't alone in their thoughts, and their experience, unfortunately, is something that's quite common. And I would just encourage them to reach out. There are organisations we spoke about 5 times more, but there are people there that want to offer support and help. And I think sometimes when you go through something and, like we've said, sometimes you're not sure if it's racism or, is it because I'm a woman or am I just making it up? It can make you feel like you have to kind of keep your feelings to yourself. So yeah, I would just encourage you to try and reach out to those who are there to help. I will, if that's okay, plug SANS. As I said, I feel like there is kind of a link because we are a baby loss charity, and we are there to support everyone, who has experienced baby loss. And we are trying to be more accessible and known to all people. I recently started, and my role is specifically to reach out to the Black community. So I just want to share, if you have experienced a loss, we are there to support everyone, whether you are a parent, whether you are a health professional, we are there to support you as well. But yeah, my overall message is do reach out to support, reach out to organisations that feel like safe and supportive spaces, because we all deserve to be supported.
Thank you. And I think that's a brilliant place to leave it, actually. I think you said that really well, Patrice, thank you. I will put links in the show notes to SANS, to 5 times more, to the Embrace report, so that people can look at that in more.
Birthrights as well. So
anti-birthrights, yeah. So I'll link to all of them in the report. But thank you so much for your time. I found it really interesting learning more, and I kind of came from a position of knowledge, so I know that for people who have very little knowledge about this, that that it will be really valuable to them. So thank you to Patrice, to Afsha, and to Amneet. And just wanted to say that if you are listening to this on the podcast, please like and subscribe it, just to make sure you see future events and to help others find it too. We have got an upcoming live event in September, which is Black All Year, No More Box Ticking, which is really, well, it pretty much says what it says on the tin. It's about moving away from just ticking boxes and making real meaningful change in equality within leadership in particular. And you can find that on Eventbrite Black All Year. So thank you all once again, and I hope to hear from you again in future.